Happy to say a few words of introduction on behalf of the organizers. The webinar is organized by UNESCO together with the International Task Force on Teachers and with the Hamad Ben Rashid Maktoum Foundation. Just before beginning our and turning over to the panel, perhaps a few words just in way of background and specifically on the region, perhaps two observations for the Arab world, two unique characteristics, perhaps two contradictions. The first is that it's a region with a very young population. 60% of the population is under the age of 60. It's actually the highest share of youth in the overall population compared to other regions. So there is tremendous potential for social, cultural, political developments, economic developments in the region. Yet it's also a region that has very high rates of youth unemployment, actually the highest in the world and twice the global average. The second observation or second contradiction is there is a very high demand for education in the region. And there's been a lot of progress made over the past 15, 20 years in expanding access to educational opportunities at all levels, and also in narrowing the gender gap at all levels of education. Yet there has been a chronic challenge, I would say, of quality of education, of basic education, and we have seen this multiple times in large-scale learning assessments, where the Arab countries that have participated often are below the global average, and in a few instances actually ranks among the lowest of all the participating countries in reading comprehension, in mathematics, in science. So there, while we do have islands of excellence in education across the region, there is, on average, this challenge around the quality of education. So I just wanted to start with those two as in way of background, and then to add the COVID dimension. I mean, like elsewhere in the world, the COVID disruption has added obviously further challenges in terms of access to educational opportunity, to effective participation, and to the quality of learning. But it has also forced, as we know, adaptation and innovation. And teachers have been very much at the front line of this, and we have rediscovered the foundational role of teachers in education, in the educational processes, and in our societies more widely. And we've come to realize that we can and we must improve the teaching and learning methods, revisit curriculum, our assessment methods, the pedagogical management of schools, and more generally, a culture of learning. Before handing it over to the panel, and thank you to the panelists for agreeing to share your experiences and your insights. And before handing it over to Dr. Malek Zalouk from the American University of Cairo to introduce and frame the panel, perhaps just a few practical reminders. We do have interpretation in English, Arabic, and French. You do have an interpretation button on the bottom of your screen that you can use. The session, as you will have seen, is also being recorded. You do have the chat to post any questions and comments as we begin the panel discussion. And finally, just to remind everyone to mute your microphones when you're not speaking, so that we don't have interference of background sound. So thank you once again to all the panelists, but to all the participants for joining us for this webinar. And I'd now like to hand it over to Dr. Malak Zalouk.
Good afternoon, greetings, good morning, and welcome to this very significant and timely panel on the futures of teaching in the Arab states. مرحبا بالمشاركين في هذا اللقاء الهام والحيوي حول مستقبل التدريس في الدول العربية. I'll now switch back to English as I introduce my panelists, and then I'll just say a few words on this particular consultation. So amongst the panelists are Dr. Najwa Al-Hosani, she's actually the acting dean from the College of Education in the United Arab Emirates, University of the United Arab Emirates. Welcome, Dr. Najwa. We also have on our panel Elisa Guerra, founder of the Colegio Valle de Filadelfia in Mexico and the member of the International Commission Futures of Education Initiative. Welcome, Elisa. With us also from Palestine, we have Mr. Helmi Hamdan, who's an educational trainer and a supervisor at the National Institute for Educational Training in Palestine. We also have a fourth distinguished panelist, Ambassador Antonio Novoa. He's the ambassador of Portugal to UNESCO and also a member of the International Commission on the Futures of Education Initiative. Welcome, Ambassador. We have a young practitioner and Christine Safwat from Egypt, who's the executive director of Educate Me Foundation in Egypt. And of course, you all met up front Dr. Sobhi Tawil, the director of the Futures of Education Initiative at UNESCO. And last but not least, we also have Carlos Vargas Tamez, who's the head of the Secretariat for the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030. He's also the chief teacher development, he's the chief of the teacher development section in UNESCO. I'm hoping this will be a very fruitful, interactive and interesting conversation that we will have together. And before I set off to ask the several questions from the colleagues, the panelists, I just wanted to say a quick word that this consultation is extremely timely. It comes at a time when there is a coincidence of so many initiatives happening, including the futures of education. But importantly, it happens after a year and a half almost of the pandemic, where teachers have really proven that they can be in the leadership position, that teachers are in fact very clearly central to learning and education. They have proven their resilience in many parts of the world. I'm sure there are exceptional narratives of what teachers have been able to do during this pandemic. So from every single point of view, it is a very significant conversation we're having on the centrality of the role and the future of teachers in this region, in the Arab region. So let us explore it together. I will start by tossing a question that I will ask of all panelists, largely to explore together the positive advances and challenges which exist today for teachers generally, but more specifically in the Arab states. So I will first turn to you, Elisa. You will be the first speaker on our panel. And if you could please, in 2 to 3 minutes, tell us, in your view, what are you most hopeful for with regards to the role of teachers in education in the future and for the profession of teaching in general?
Thank you, Malak, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Well, what a year has this been. What I am most hopeful, and I even say even grateful, is that as a result partly of the pandemic, we can finally put to rest this ludicrous idea that technology will eventually replace teachers. We have been debating over years, but we have no way to either prove or disprove this idea. But now we have the evidence of what actually happens when we close the schools and when we are forced to deprive our students of the supporting presence of a teacher right there beside them. We have confirmed beyond any doubt that education just won't happen as if by chance when you open your computer or when you take a stroll in the park. It must be intentional, organized, planned, and shared in a collective space. And for this, we still need schools and we still need teachers. Now, I can say, of course, that I am happy about the education calamity brought by the massive closings of schools worldwide. Of course not. I would have preferred for this not to happen and to be still debating over teachers and technology, but it happened. And if something positive we can rescue from this dishevelment is that we might very well be in the anteroom of a renewed revalorization of teachers as professionals. We now have a deeper understanding of how vital teachers and schools are, not only for our learning, but also for our economies, for the economy. Now, the debate over teachers and technology, to be fair, was not only about whether teachers could be replaced by technology or not. It was also implied that technology could make a teacher. For example, if you had some knowledge about something and you had technology, then you could become a teacher. Anyone could become a teacher. And again, this has just been disproved. Knowledge, of course, is essential, but it's not enough. You also need pedagogy. And technology for sure is great, providing that you have good pedagogy to start with. Technology amplifies pedagogy, but technology can't create pedagogy. So as an analogy, let's say that everyone can sing. If you have a voice, you can sing. However, not everyone has a melodious voice. Some people do, either by training or talent, usually a combination of both. And what a pleasure it is to hear such people sing. Give them the microphone. Other people, like me, well, think twice before giving us the microphone. Your ears could regret it.
Likewise, you sound like you have a great voice anyway, Elisa. So, yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Anyway. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. I will now switch to Arabic. وهتوجه للأستاذ حلمي حمدان بسؤال حول ما هي أكثر
Hamdan, and it is the following. What are you most hopeful for? What should be done to strengthen the role of teachers in the future, but also strengthening the teaching profession in the Arab world? You have the floor. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure I heard the interpretation. Could you... could you please tell us what should be done to strengthen the role of teachers, but also to strengthen the teaching profession? Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you to all of the participants. I wish you a good day from Palestine, which is still an occupied territory by the Israeli forces. We are launching a call to protect education in Palestine because this sector is faced with numerous challenges posed by the Israeli occupiers. In response to your question, which was tied to the introduction from the beginning of this session, I believe that everyone wants to improve the quality of education and teaching. And this can be done by looking into many different issues and addressing them, moving from education to learning, for example, and ensuring good quality of education, which will allow students to become innovative and able to adapt to the changes in the world. This is something that can't be done without strengthening the teaching profession as a whole, and specifically in the Arab region. We need a real teaching profession. We need to ensure that this job is a real recognized profession, like medicine, for example. We need to strengthen the social status of the profession, psychologically and emotionally support teachers, because teachers are the ones who will guide their students and allow them to fulfill their potential. Today, we've moved to distance learning, and I agree with Elisa. Teachers cannot be replaced by technology, and we can't close schools forever. Technology must be an environment which allows us to transfer knowledge. We should see it as a tool. That's why we should develop teachers' skills and strengthen their social status. And of course, strengthen their roles, ensuring social dialogue regarding the status of teachers. And that's where unions have a key role to play. Now, if you'll allow me just one more minute to finish my answer. We're talking about strengthening the status of teachers and why it's important to have a social dialogue. This is what's been done at the Palestinian Teachers Union over the past few years. We reached an agreement in Palestine in 2017, and this agreement is currently being developed. It foresees many different issues and addresses many challenges, namely the lack of financial support. And I'll come back to this later on in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Helmi, for this answer.
And I'll move on to Ambassador Novoa to look at the flip side of the question, and that is, what, in your views, are the challenges facing the role of teachers in education in the future? And what are the challenges facing the profession as well? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I will switch to French, if it's okay for you, in the sake of diversity, linguistic diversity. But if not, I will go on in English. But alors, je m'adresse.
So, Let me talk to you in French. First of all, to thank all of you and to say that I entirely agree with what has just been said by Elisa and by our other colleague who has just spoken. I think that all of us feel that we're coming to the end of something, and the beginning of something else in the world and education and schools. Now, this feeling is something we could experience as a loss, as something that is ending. Sometimes we'll talk about the death of schools or the death of teachers. Or we could experience it as a sort of rebirth, a renaissance, a renewal of the work done by schools and by teachers. And it's in that dimension that I would like to place myself. Today, I think there is a much clearer awareness of what Elisa was saying about teachers' role, and this clear awareness and this role of teachers concerning learning, but also the public and shared dimension of education. Education isn't simply an individual act. It hasn't simply an individual dimension. It also has a collective dimension. It involves sharing. It has a shared dimension. It means building things together and participating. And that's what we mean, or what we expect, rather, from teachers today and in the future. And so these are challenges the teachers will have to meet in coming years. They concern this new relationship with society. This crisis has showed us that we need teachers to be closer to families, society, to communities, to associations, that there needs to be participation in what we could call public education space, which teachers must fill in years to come. And that could also be, sometimes I use this concept of a new contract between teachers and societies. There are also new tasks to be done by teachers within schools. And here, schools are very important. They must be protected. What are schools for? Well, the traditional answer is schools are for educating human beings, with other human beings being their teachers, with the goal of the shared good of humanity. So if we look at these three dimensions, we can see the humanistic character of our children, of our students, the humanistic character of our teachers, and also the shared good of humanity. And this is at the very heart of schools' work. There's one word in particular which needs to be placed: cooperation. Cooperation is an essential thing for defining teachers and schools' futures. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for those excellent remarks, as usual.
We'll now switch back to English, and we'll move on to Christine. Also asking Christine, from your point of view, what are the challenges facing the role of teachers in education in the future and the profession at large in the Arab region?
Thank you very much, Dr. Malak, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Well, I totally second Elisa and my colleagues regarding that the past period showed the whole world that in education, teachers' role is important, and the technology can never replace teachers, and the teachers cannot be replaced by robots. However, teachers can learn how robots can help them perform better. So I'd like to take another perspective, which I think was a key highlight in the past period and moving forward in the future. One of them is the school community at large, and the importance of the school community, the importance of parents' engagement and their role in the education system, the importance of students' engagement in the learning activity, and the importance of integrating technology. Because for years, the schools have been defined in a very specific way, where there's a wall, there's walls, there's classrooms, there's this very specific definition to what a school is. And I think this past period has actually shown that that schools need to be redefined and reimagined, and that they can take different forms. And for decades, education has also been not as progressive and as relevant to the changes that are happening in science and technology as the rest of the sectors. So I think that the pandemic came in favor of the education system to let us understand and learn how these can come into favor in the education system. And I think that it helped us kind of try to push kind of a bar or a limit or somewhere that kind of was very resistant and kind of very slow, but it has actually, the pandemic has helped us to move forward with it. I think the main challenges revolve again around the students' engagement and participation, parents' engagement in the learning activity, the change of role of the teacher and how important the teacher's role is, but what the new role is, and the teachers moving from them being teachers, particularly in the Arab world where we have more of a sense of that the teacher needs to say everything and give the information by spoon feeding, to moving towards to them becoming leaders of the education activity, to them becoming more of advisors, more of guides, more of facilitators. So I think the role of teachers is changing, and the pandemic has served us in this favor. And the main challenges revolve around how the teachers could grasp this, which I totally second Dr. Malak, that the teachers have proven the past year that they can become leaders of the education system, and how to involve the different stakeholders in the learning activity, and also how to integrate technology and use it for the favor of the quality of learning at large.
Thank you so much for your insights, Christine. Brilliant, as always. Thank you so much. I will now hand over to my colleague Maram from UNESCO, who will share a poll with the panelists. So Maram, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Malak. مرحبا بكم جميعا.
Hello to you all. I would like to do a quick poll to know what is your position. We will participate with our colleague Yal. We'll put a question and we'll ask you to answer within 30 seconds. Yal, you have the floor. The question is, as appears on the screen, what do you think of the main challenges for teachers today? Could you please move the mouse so people can see all suggestions on realistic expectations, managing distance learning, out-of-date or irrelevant curriculum, lack of professional development opportunities, no social emotional support, low social status and teaching profession, bureaucratic workload demand? We'll see your answers in a few minutes. People are voting now. We are waiting for all the participants to vote. Thank you very much for those of you that have voted. We'll see now the answers. Yal, can you present the answers? As you can see on the screen, the management of distance learning is the most important point. The second point is lack of, I correct myself, says the speaker, is the low social status of teaching profession. Thank you to you all for voting. Dr. Malak, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you to you, Mrs. Samara. And now I will give the floor to Dr. Nashwa. How will the experience change due to the pandemic in terms of improving teachers' employment? What role can we play to preserve the new acquired skills? How can we attract new technicians towards education? Thank you very much, madam. Thank you to the Hamdan institution. Thank you for the
initiative, The Futures of Teachers, employing teachers and attracting new teachers is not an easy task. And we note a reduction in the percentages of people joining the teaching profession in the world. This has led to great concerns in the educational world, not only in Arab countries, but also throughout the planet. And we wanted to look at some of the reasons for this decline in new teachers. In the past years, the strong competition on the international markets has led to a reduction of skills in the field of education. That is why we've seen fewer people join the profession of teachers in countries such as the United States or United Kingdom. We note a strong lack of teachers, such as the case of New Zealand as well. Even China suffers from an insufficient number of teachers, and they're trying to encourage retired teachers to come back to education to try and compensate for this gap in the number of teachers. Specific sums were allocated by some countries to allow teachers to move to rural areas or to poorer areas, to encourage them to fill in positions and compensate this disequilibrium. When we speak about means of attraction, there are many and numerous. However, true and full-fledged decisions have to be taken by the authorities. Those decisions may represent a burden for the budget of a state. The people who support teachers must also be encouraged. A teacher has many roles today. He plays the role of the teacher, but he sometimes needs assistance. We must also offer them decent salaries and other interesting incentives. Thus, we can attract young people towards the sector of education. We must also guarantee the fact that hours in class are acceptable. A teacher who should offer quality teaching should have a restricted number of hours and a restricted number of students. You cannot teach properly if you have 60 to 70 pupils in a class. Thank you very much, Dr. Novoa. Thank you for your very clear answer and your very accurate answer, Dr. Novoa. And we now move on to English.
Novoa once again. And if you could please answer the following question, Ambassador Novoa. Nowadays, we talk a lot about the changes that have come about as to how, where, and what we should learn, and everyone is very conscious of self-directed learning, autonomous learning, etc., etc. So why is it important now within this conversation to talk about teaching? Would anyone like to step in to answer this question? If Ambassador Novoa, there you are. Okay, so the question was, nowadays there's a lot of conversation going on about the fact that, you know, how should we learn, where should we learn, and that there's a lot of self-directed learning, especially with all this technology, etc. And there's a lot of autonomous learning happening. So the question is, why within this new context is it important to talk about teaching? Can you unmute, please? Can you unmute your mic?
Yes.
Thank you.
For someone that has been studying history of education for a long time, we know that in education sometimes it's a question of balance. sometimes you need to balance things. And when I say that sometimes you need to balance things, is then sometimes you need to push for learning, and you need to push for individual freedoms, and you need to push for that freedom for learning that is absolutely crucial. And other times, which is the case now, we need to push for the idea that learning is not only individual, that learning is also a collective endeavor, that we need to build the common through learning, that learning is about a relationship with others, students, others, the teachers, and that this relationship, as Elisa was saying in the beginning, cannot be replaced for anything. And so probably if we look only at the individual level, and yet learning could be done by technological, by different apparatus and everything. But learning is also a collective process. And for that, we need teachers. We need teachers to engage with students. We need students to engage with other students. We need this process of cooperation, of collaboration, of co-construction, of co-creation that is absolutely crucial. And in this matter, the role of teachers is absolutely essential and cannot be replaced by any kind of devices, even if technologies are very important, even if all the technological advances can be very important in the hands of teachers for this process of teaching and for this process of advancing. And I would like to say something that was said, I think, by Christine in the beginning, and I repeat very often, but I repeat it and at the same time I say, yes, but is the idea that teachers are facilitators and teachers are guiders and they have new roles, which is absolutely crucial to say, but without losing the teacher identity. Because many of the people that talks about this, we are all educators. Or as Elisa was saying, anyone can be a teacher. We are now, everyone is a facilitator. Everyone can teach because we have technologies. So this is a very dangerous discourse that is going on now very, very, very strongly in our societies and everywhere. So this is not the case. We need to preserve the teaching identity, the teaching professionality, recognizing that the roles of teachers is changing and that we have different roles and not the traditional roles with the so-called pedagogy of the lesson, even if the pedagogy of the lesson is also important, but it's not the only pedagogy that it's important, of course.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And since we're talking about, again, the role of technology, let me turn to Christine once again, and let me ask you, we have noted, of course, during the pandemic that teachers have moved quite a bit and have gone between a distance, part-time or full-time during the pandemic. And this has been challenging for teachers, of course, to switch constantly to these different modalities. So to what extent do you think the effects of this pandemic will shape the future of the teaching profession?
Thank you, Dr. Malak. Well, first of all, I think that the fact that it has been online versus offline versus blended was all, as I was mentioning, I think in my opinion was more of a pilot. I think we're still figuring out what is working and what is not to the different contexts, not only to the region, but also to the specifics of the country and to the specifics of the sectors of the country, because I think particularly in places like the Arab region, working in the public schools, for example, is very different to the private schools. The resources are different and all of that. So I think we're still figuring out how it will affect the teaching profession in the future. I think that the more technology progresses and is introduced to the education system, the more relevant it becomes to the students and the less relevant it becomes to the teachers, if I may say, because the current current students and the current generation is coming up and has been growing with mobile phones in their hands. The teachers have not. So I think it requires from the teachers more learning, more agility, more flexibility, but at the same time, as Professor Novoa has just mentioned, at the same time without losing their identity, the pedagogy. So I think it requires extra work from the teacher's side, but also support from the school management and the policies, the education policies in general, to support particularly on the professional development front, because I think there has also been a gap in the region in the professional development front, whether in having proper frameworks to work on their career development, their utilization, but also to have proper professional development training programs for the teachers, and also to have continuous professional development. And throughout the past years, more and more, the teacher profession has become less appealing, unfortunately. But I think there's now a huge opportunity for it to become more appealing if we work properly on creating proper professional development programs, working on their career developments, and working on how teachers' role can become actually a leadership role. And finally, I think there's also an opportunity for teacherpreneurship. For years, we've been talking about entrepreneurship, but I think that with the pandemic, the teacherpreneurship is an idea that will come into action and has already been coming into action, because teachers are the one who understand the end user. They are in the startup world and they're part of the ecosystem.
Thank you, Christine. I will pick up on the whole idea of professional development, and I will now switch to Arabic once again and move on to دكتورة نجوى. طيب دكتورة نجوى، إيه هي الأفكار أو المواضيع أو
Dr. Najwa,
التي ينبغي أن تشملها برامج تعليم
what are the
لهذه التحديات؟
methods, the means, and the topics that teacher education programs should include? Well, as you know, these teacher training curricula are essential. If they're not renewed, if they're not updated, then this can lead to imbalance, namely in the current context. If we want to ensure that teaching is successful and that the curricula is successful, as the designers of the curricula, we must be able to change paradigm and to bring about a change in culture so that teachers can adapt to their new role as facilitators and not simply givers of lessons. The teachers must seek out the information themselves. Now, when it comes to topics that should be covered in teacher education programs, we need to include technology. In the Emirates, we call this intelligent education or smart education, to teach multimodal and blended learning techniques. And the United Arab Emirates presented a pilot project in 2012. So we're very familiar with this issue of hybrid learning. And we have been for the past 9 years approximately. In teacher education programs, we must also focus on the well-being of teachers and also students. Teacher training programs must also foster innovation and creativity. For example, when it comes to finding new methods of assessing students, so that we can move away from the traditional conventional methods of assessment, continuous assessment. Another important topic is on-the-ground practical training. Today, due to lockdown, we've been trying to work on practical cases, for example, distance learning, recorded lessons so that we can draw lessons from these distance learning experiences. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Najwa, for your very exhaustive response. Now I'll give the floor to Mr. Hilmi Hamdan. Could you please answer the following question? In light of this pandemic, when it comes to teachers' training, what are the best practices that we should keep for the future? For example, ensuring small-sized groups in classes, and the different experiences that we can learn from in the context of the pandemic. Well, thank you very much. I agree with what has been said previously by my colleagues. I'd like to insist on the importance of prosperity and the well-being of teachers. The answers to the questionnaire earlier showed that the social status of teachers is an important factor in the future of education. The teaching profession means that teaching or learning is not just a fundamental right for human beings, but it's a right that leads to the fulfillment of other rights. And therefore, it's very important, if we want to truly develop teaching and protect it, we need to give priority to teachers, teaching, and the well-being of these teachers and teaching. I think that today, in light of the pandemic and the economic ramifications of this pandemic, currently there are many issues when it comes to financial support for teaching and education. So we need to find alternative solutions to protect the teaching profession. And of course, I agree that today, in most teaching institutions or even in ministries, there's a trend towards self-learning and lifelong learning as well. And that's why we need to empower teachers so that they can master these strategies and ensure a better future for education, and also move from education to continuous learning, something that develops permanently. Thank you very much, Mr. Hilmi.
To take over and present the second poll.
Hello again, like the first time, my colleague Yad is going to share a quick poll to hear your views. Let's take 30 seconds to choose two options on the following question. What can best support teachers to enable them to lead educational change in the future? Transform teacher education, increase teacher autonomy, involve teachers in education policy making, invest in school leadership, improve teacher mobility and career development, foster peer support networks and teacher mentoring, better infrastructure, including ICTs. Please choose your answer, two answers, and remember you might need to scroll down to see all the options. In a few seconds, we will see your answers, but please take your time to make two choices. Kindly remember you might need to scroll down to see all the options. Please make two choices. And soon we will see the answers. And now, as you can see, the most popular answer is involve teachers in education policy making, and it's followed by better infrastructure, including ICTs. Now, Dr. Malak, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Maram. I will once again turn to Elisa in exactly 2 minutes as very crisp answer. If you could please think forward to its 2050 and tell us what you think, in your view, would be the necessary environment, the right environment to help teachers to continue to learn, to expand their skills, and adapt their pedagogical approaches so that they can continue to accompany students in the best of their learning.
Thank you again. Well, there is an interesting idea that economist Danny Roderick has proposed in a number of publications, and that I think that links well to teachers. We know that inequalities on the rise, partly as a result of the insularity of the knowledge economy, where a minuscule few reap the giant share of the benefits of technology and innovation, and middle-class jobs are the most likely to be disrupted. Now, Professor Roderick advances what he calls the good job policies designed to tackle this inequality. And well, the creation and sustainment of these good jobs. Now, what are these good jobs? It's secure employment with benefits and good pay, yes, but also jobs that allow for autonomy, enjoyment, and prospects for advancement. Teachers need these good jobs. Sometimes we have the secure employment or the good pay and benefits. Sometimes we have both. Sometimes we have none. But what we most lack is agency. Many teachers are told what to teach, how to teach it, how for long, what materials to use, and so on. And there is very little room for creativity and imaginations. Teachers who are innovators usually innovate without asking for permission. But wouldn't it be nice if we provided outlets for this ingeniousness? Now, the pandemic had every education system on its knees, and while that happens, the teachers found a way to their students. And in these cracks of the overwhelmed systems, teachers contrived solutions. Some failed, some were successful, but they connected with other educations in their own schools, in their extended communities, and even internationally. They collaborated and developed new skills. I think it will be tragic if these windows of opportunity were shut again. Let's not allow that to happen.
Thank you, Elisa. And now, last but certainly not least, Ambassador Novoa, if you could just give us a glimpse of what the Commission's approach will be and its research and recommendations on the future of teachers and the teaching profession.
Thank you. I think that first of all, the Commission is working strongly in the directions that we have been discussing here. And so the strengthening of the teacher profession, explaining the need to change and to transform the teaching profession, but without losing the teachers, without transforming everyone in a teacher, without transforming everyone in an educator, without this kind of very, very loosey way of thinking about even, it's very strange, but I'm going to say one thing that it's very strange for me. Even the word educators, which is a very good word and a strong word in terms of a humanistic vision, even the word educators is sometimes risky in nowadays, because it's the idea that we are all educators and everyone is an educator. And it's true, it's partially true, but sometimes it's said in a way of dissolving the teaching profession and saying that teachers are like parents and are like other people. We are all at the same level. We are not all at the same level. We have a different mission, and school education is not the same thing that education at the family or education at the society. Is a different thing, is a different mission, is a different perspective, and that's why we need teachers with a reinforced mission. And in this reinforcement of the mission of the teachers, I strongly believe going to teacher education and going to an intervention of teachers in policy making, that collaboration is central. Teacher education is about sharing what we know already. It's about sharing our knowledge, our professional knowledge, one with the other. Of course, that sometimes we need to go behind that. We need to go to universities, we need to go to other places. But at the center, the core of the teaching, the teacher education needs to be the sharing, the reflection between teachers, the way how we share what we know, and we build stronger communities that can be involved strongly in policy making, and that can have a stronger place in politics, in the sense of politics of education. And that's, for me, it's absolutely crucial. And I believe that the Commission is working on that direction. And that's why by the end of our report, as we imagine it in this moment, after giving our main thesis and ideas, we will consecrate 2 chapters, one to teachers, a special chapter to teachers, and another one, a special chapter to higher education, because higher education is strongly important in our world, and it's also connected with teacher education and with the role of higher education in promoting public education, in promoting quality education and inclusive education for all. The role of higher education, not only for higher education, but the role of higher education for primary and school education, and the commitment of higher education at this level. So
thank you so much. I can see the passion, but I need to stop you because people will want to discuss. But this is so okay. Thank you, and it's come across beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's very reassuring that this is the direction of the mission. And now it's time for the discussion, and hopefully everyone will have popped in some questions, which my dear colleagues will help me, both Maram and Leila, to identify.
Thank you, Malak, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for this incredibly interesting discussion so far. I'm very glad to say that there's also been an incredibly rich discussion in the question and answer box. So I'd like to thank everyone for all their comments. There's been a lot, so I'm just going to summarize maybe 3 points that have come through, and maybe we'll have time for some more. The first, obviously, is this question of teacher professional development and teacher preparation. There was a question to say, what do we think of the past teacher professional development until now? And do we feel that it prepared teachers for this crisis and other crises? There was another point in general about fostering the talent and innovation of teachers. How can we do this? A lot of questions about how can we do this and what role does this play in teacher motivation? And thirdly, there was a lot of questions, comments, obviously, about the role of ICTs and blended learning for teachers. And interestingly, this also, there was the link made between ICTs, but also, are these multiple tools healthy for teachers and students? So there was the link between ICTs and the teacher well-being as well. So I'll stop there. I think that's given the panelists enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'd like to turn to Professor Najwa, if you don't mind, to tackle the question on teacher professional development and how satisfying has it been so far. And as for innovation, of teachers, fostering their innovation, I'd like Elisa, if possible, to tackle this component. And I would like, lastly, the whole notion of the ICT and, how healthy is it to have all these multiple tools? If Christine, you could tackle this last point. Okay, so Dr. Najwa, faddali.
شكرا دكتورة.
Thank you, Doctor. I see that training teachers is an essential part of their preparation, whether they follow classical training for teachers or when they enter the sector of education, because training accompanies preparation and allows teacher to test what they're learning. And the Ministry of Education in the United Arab Emirates has developed a full-fledged program for teachers, and they use technology at best. The ministry has trained more than 25 teachers and administrative staff of public schools and more than 9,200 teachers and school directors in the private sector. We have used artificial intelligence for teaching in schools to reach the best results. And we've also accompanied the changes due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you allow me, Madam, the programs to educate teachers looked at those questions, but not in sufficient dosage, if I may say so. And the word dosage was used in English by the speaker. We are now trying to complement the training of the teacher to help them face the consequences of the crisis. Thank you, says the moderator, and I would like to share with you the Egyptian idea in terms of preparing and educating teachers. We have very good teacher education programs in our teachers' school, and we are looking at the skills of every diploma holder. And here I'd like to say before you that there are specific skills and qualifications a teacher should have, not only in the field of technology. The teacher should be a researcher, should be a producer of knowledge, should be a professional, should be able to know the special aspects of his sector. He should be able to think, to invent, to innovate in his job, in the way he teaches. And the teacher should also be independent, should be able to take daily decisions in his very sensitive position.
English, having also brought to the fore the ideas that are so important in teacher preparation, which is not all about obviously technological prowess, but is also very profoundly teachers developing their research activities and really pushing forward innovation, creativity, autonomy, and all these other possibilities of creative decision-making in the classroom as well. And now, Elisa, if you could look at how we foster innovation amongst teachers.
Thank you, Malak. I would like to build up on what Ambassador Novoa was saying about learning together and how we learn better when we learn together. Well, I also think that teacher innovation is not really an individual pursuit. We need a collaborative culture to foster innovation. It's very difficult to innovate if you are doing it by yourself. So we need leadership that supports innovation, but also peer support for innovation. I think that sums it up. You can have good ideas, but unless you have a team to help you carry through those ideas, it's very difficult to move forward.
Totally agreed. Brilliant. And that's why peer communities of learners is so significant in any teacher preparation. Maybe Ambassador Novoa, in 1 minute, if you have something to add very quickly.
No, you have said it very well, Malak and Elisa, Guerra, very, very well. If we go to the second question that was asked by the participants, talent and innovation, I think it's very easy. If you go to the history of education, you know that everything that is important just begins in a conversation between two teachers. Can we do something differently? Can we try something different? And then between two teachers go to 3 and to 4 and to 5. and things begin. That's how the best experiences in the history of education have always begun. It's not from policy, it's not from government, it's not from the outside. It's always through this kind of collaboration, sometimes in very small schools, sometimes in very poor communities, but things happen through this kind of dialogue and construction, as Elisa was telling. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Christine, do you want to address the whole idea of whether the introduction of ICT is presenting a lot more multiple tools than necessary, and what is the position of teachers and all that?
Yes, sure. Well, I think coming from a background of networks engineering and working in higher education in this particular field, we used to for years teach networks engineering without using much technology in the way we deliver our education. And I think that in itself proves how much the education scene lacked the integration of technology and the role of ICT in general, and therefore lacked relevance of the change, the rapid change that is happening in the world, and hence its relevance to the students. So I think that the fact that the pandemic has introduced ICT and blended learning and has also proven that human interaction is still very important. So blended learning, the idea of online versus offline and what is the right balance between both, I think is the new challenge. But I also think that, that the introduction of this whole ICT and blended learning has a lot of opportunity to help teachers with all the different channels and applications that are available to perform better if they are offered with the right support, as of course Mrs. Najwa has mentioned earlier. And I also think that it gives a lot of space for creativity, for innovation, and particularly for teacherpreneurship. Like the past period, too many systems and new applications and new initiatives have come about, but I think they would be much more relevant if they're coming about from the teachers themselves, whom are at the core of the challenge and the real scene of the system. And I also think that we at Educate Me, for example, have been working with teachers in the public school system, and we've seen teachers coming from being very resistant to technology, saying that we can never do that, we can never use it, to them becoming leaders, not only in their schools, but in their community at large.
Thank you, Christine. And yes, indeed, I see a lot of interventions popping up on the sustainability of e-learning. So it's like the pandemic forced everyone to go into e-learning, and people are concerned, how can we sustain e-learning and all this kind of new technology? But let me remind everyone that we must not, in my personal view, be hung up on all the latest tech. We need to be thinking of combinations of traditional tech along with more advanced tech, and that's the creativity and ingenuity of teachers who can actually mingle both and mix both together. So أستاذ حلمي تتصور حضرتك
Dr. Helmi, there is a question which was put, the sustainability of e-learning, of distant learning. How does this take place? Please allow me to speak quickly about a series of questions. Training teachers cannot be separated from the training of school directors, administrators, and supervisors. There should be a general information spread to all, and this is the role of the Palestinian Ministry of Education, and we do this coordination with the Center of Supervision. We have produced thousands of teachers before the pandemic. We have continued giving diplomas to teachers during the pandemic, and we use technologies. We use this integrated process of teaching to face different challenges. First and foremost, the involvement of the student in this distance learning process, in the electronic teaching process. And as Dr. Najwa said, we have to do qualitative assessment in favor of learning, not only to have good grades and good marks and say that this is all nice and beautiful. And this is what we are really doing in the Ministry of Education in Palestine and in the National Institute for Teachers Training. It is also important to say that today, one should implement this slogan, education for all, to preserve education. The pandemic has had serious consequences on education in the world, and many areas, many regions of the world cannot guarantee education to all. And by moving to electronic teaching, many areas, regions, and teachers are left without any support because some areas have no connection to the internet. So how can we implement this very brilliant idea, education to all, if there are areas in Algeria, Palestine, or elsewhere where people have no connection to the internet? In a very short time, the Ministry of Education has been able to develop a teaching platform for hybrid teaching to support both teachers and students and provide the educational system with minimum support. And I am speaking about areas in the rural areas of Jerusalem, of Jericho. It is difficult to act because of the extension of the Israeli wall. Israel is fighting the survival of all those technologies we can use. We are forbidden from using 4G and 5G. Schools are destroyed, programs are interrupted. So what future can we speak about if there is no true support of education? Education is an international, a global interest. That is why we have to pay attention to all those elements if we want to guarantee the survival of education in all sectors. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Helmi. And I would like to add
back to English, and I would like to add a few comments to the whole notion of sustaining, e-learning and self-learning. I think that also comes along with a lot more student engagement, which a lot of people underlined, and also a transformed relationship between teachers and students. We do need to have a far more liberational, democratized relationship whereby young students can perform reverse mentorship. They can be engaged also in finding the solutions. They can be engaged in supporting teachers if that relationship were to change. I think if there aren't any more questions, Leila or Maram, that you would like to bring to the fore, maybe I can do one last question.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions.
Wonderful.
I might come back to a question that was posed earlier in the chat, but it would be good to hear from the panel. There's been a lot of issues and questions about learning losses and assessments and the return to school. And it would be interesting to hear about what this means for teachers, what will be expected of teachers in recovering learning losses and assessments, and how can they be supported in this. I can stop there if you like. There was another question, if you have time for it, which Hilmi touched on a little bit about how do we support teachers working in difficult situations and in remote areas as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. I think you've got about 5 to 10 more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So talking about learning losses, assessment, and going back to school, and how this might create an onus on the teachers, and obviously a challenge to make up for the learning losses and to also manage the assessment. So perhaps I will go to Elisa and Dr. Najwa, if you could comment.
Sure, thank you, Malak. Well, it's going to be a monumental task, of course, but it's going to be more so if we still keep thinking about education and the curriculum as this huge thing that we need to finish up. It's going to become a rat race. We could propose instead to go over depth instead of breadth, and to really tackle on things profoundly, and to create dialectic methods of teaching, present the curriculum not just as a set thing, but as something that requires intergenerational conversations, to present at least 2 points of view and to propose these discussions. If we can achieve our students to become autonomous learners in the collaboration of the school, if they can become lifelong learners, then it will be easier for them to overcome the difficulties that were presented by this pandemic. So in short, depth over breadth of the curriculum, and to give students agency to embark in knowledge in the collaboration with others.
Thank you. Dr. Najwa?
نعم شكرا سيدتي الكريمة.
Thank you.
Ambassador Novoa, if you would like to add also. تفضلي دكتورة نجوى.
شكرا سيدتي.
Thank you very much. The loss of teaching was one of the major elements a lot of people have suffered from. And I do agree with my colleague Elisa. We have to look at the results of education. What are the important elements we should concentrate upon? We have to look at curricula, and looking at every single detail in the curriculum is impossible today. We have to look at the results. The teacher should be able to know what are the necessary and the expected results to be able to compensate for the loss of learning. And after that, we have to link the information to the reality of teachers. Our colleagues have spoken about the culture of teaching to the culture of learning. So the student must also look for the information, and the more he does, the more the loss will decrease.
Want to add more to this particular issue? Hello? Hello? Ambassador Novoa, would you like to add more insights to that particular issue?
Just a very quick comment to probably to end. I think that the question of the losses of learning is very important, because of course we are in a very deep crisis, in a very difficult time, and we need to be aware of that. But I would say metaphorically that more important than the losses of learning is the losses of children. That we are losing children. We are losing children inside schools. We are losing a generation of children in many parts of the world. And even in those that we are not losing, the bounds between the school, the teachers, the children, they are being lost. And this is the kind of bounds, this kind of connections, this kind of being part of a school culture, of an educational culture. That's what worries me more. Even if I'm worried about the losses of learning, I must worry about this kind of disconnecting children from schools, from education, and this kind of losing children. And we are losing children. We are losing a generation of children, and we cannot do it. So we need to do our best not to lose the children.
Thank you. Thank you. Very important point. هنتقل حضرتك أستاذ حلمي حالا دلوقتي. كان في تعليق.
Dr.
ولكن أيضا إذا سمحت
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Of course, there is a learning loss, and we've observed this year due to the shift to distance learning. Now, that's true. But what's most important is to look at how to ensure continuity and how to strengthen the quality of learning, make students participate more, and to compensate for the effects of this pandemic, whilst also learning lessons from the previous year. I believe that there is a positive aspect here, which is the shift from teaching to learning. And harnessing technology for education and teaching. Even if the pandemic hadn't occurred, we would still need to be working towards this. We need to strengthen the link between teachers and students. We need to support teachers working in remote areas. And if we don't advocate, although we're not advocating for full-on distance learning, what we need to do is take the positive aspects of these tools to foster education, strengthen education for students and teachers alike. Thank you. And when it comes to support for teachers, this is a major issue, and I agree with what has been said by all of our speakers today. There is a link that's weakening between schools and students, but also among students themselves, because there should be interaction between students and children within schools. And here I'd just like to make a brief comment. There seems to be a lack of support to teachers today. We talk a lot about psychological and social support for children, but we rarely talk about this when it comes to teachers. So we need to create mechanisms to ensure this, whether we're talking about hotlines, for example. It's important to ensure psychological and social support for teachers.
To start this last point, so I'll build up on it, because I think when we talk about professional development, we usually focus more on the academic or the pedagogy component, and we have less focus on the well-being of the teachers and the social emotional learning of teachers. And I think this past period has been a roller coaster for the well-being of everyone in the world, but particularly, and on the top of this list, the schools, the teachers, and the students. And there are so many researchers, and I think we also have a lot of evidence and practices that when you work on the well-being of the teachers and foster the well-being of the teachers, it also has an effect, a direct effect to the students' well-being. So I definitely think that is one key element to support teachers, particularly teachers who are working in underprivileged areas. And the second thing I think has to do with decentralization and context. Because what works in one context does not necessarily work in another. So I think that decentralization is key, and in-depth understanding of the context is key to come up with relevant solutions. I can give a very simple example. We have a community school in a slums area here in Egypt, and for the first part of the pandemic and the first phase, we thought that none of our students have access to technology, and hence we've created toolkits. We delivered those toolkits to their doors and all of that. But then with time, we found out that almost 60% of our students have access to technology. Maybe not all the time, maybe not all the week, but some of them simply through the smartphone of their dads, on the weekend, which is still an access that can be considered and can be utilized. So I think that decentralization and context is key. And finally, the engagement and the involvement of parents with the students, particularly in underprivileged areas where there's limited access to technology and infrastructure, where parents can be the lead in the community and help the teachers.
Thank you so much, Christine. And with that, thank you all for this wonderful discussion and conversation. I would now like to hand over to Carlos Vargas Tamez, the head of the Secretariat for the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030, and also the chief of the Teacher Development Section at UNESCO. Please take over for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malak, and thank you very much to all the panel for this very, very insightful conversation. More than closing remarks, I think I would just like to highlight some takeaways for further conversations that might take place down the road. I think quite a number of issues were addressed that are very, very important in how we think about the future of teaching. And I would like to just highlight three of them. One of them that we heard throughout the conversation and in the chat as well had to do with this last issue, Malak, that you mentioned regarding the revalorization of teachers. I think it is very important that we make an effort of coherence and to have, I mean, the importance that we attach to the issue of teaching needs to be commensurate with the support that we give to teachers. So that is one very important takeaway, I believe. And that these supports vary, and they are different according to different times. So now today we talked about technology, we talked about leadership, we talked about their role in policy making. But overall, I think the issue of how the profession is actually constructed as one that is prestigious, that one that is authoritative, not authoritarian, but authoritative in the best sense of the word, is very important. So just to recall that there are normative instruments at hand that we can leverage for this to happen, not to remember, I mean, not to forget, we have a couple of recommendations, one of them the ILO UNESCO recommendation on the status of the teaching profession, which is very important, and which talks about those minimum requirements in terms of support, working conditions, remuneration, and again, support that teachers need to carry out all of these very important tasks and chores that were commented. So that is, I think, one of the takeaways. The second one has to do with the relational nature of teaching. It has been remarked by most of the panelists that the importance and probably the magic and the wisdom of teaching has to do in forging those relationships, not only with their students, but as we've seen, due to school closures and due to the digital turn and ICT-based and other forms of technology, the relationship between the teacher and the community. So important to remark the role of the teachers as well as community builders, as community makers in supporting from the local, from the identification of educational, but also social needs, which speak back to the aspirations and to the purpose of education, that they can actually have this role of mediators and that was mentioned, and this is probably the third point and final one that I would like to take up, has to do with the role of teachers as mediators. As Antonio mentioned and Elisa and basically all the panel mentioned, it is very important to consider that the role of teachers is fundamental, and I'm thinking here not of a mediation or a facilitation that erases the role of the teacher, but on the very contrary, the leadership that teacher needs, the training that teachers need, the autonomy that teachers need in actually mediating, brokering, interpreting the world their learners. So in that respect, I'm just thinking of teachers as cultural workers, as Paulo Freire used to say. I don't know the title in English, but it would be something like Letters to Those Who Dare to Teach. I read Freire in Spanish, so I guess that's the best translation I can think of. But this role of cultural workers, of really, problematizing the world, unpacking the world for learners and the communities, and understanding that the current status of affairs, of things, are a result of human action. And as in pedagogy of hope, it is because it was human-made that it could be transformed by humans and collective action. So just to say that I take those lessons from the wisdom of this panel, and just to thank you, Malak, for this brilliant and timely moderation, and all of our panel, Elisa, Christine, Najwa, Himli, and Antonio, for sharing your wisdom with us, for asking more questions, to have further conversations, and to see what the role of teachers is in shaping the futures of education, and not only in the futures of teaching. So with that, I would just like to thank, of course, all of the participants that have been following from the beginning. I would like to thank the Hamdan Foundation for their support in having this conversation. Also, the Regional Center for Quality and Excellence in Education, ABEX, ALESCO, our colleagues in UNESCO Beirut, in the regional office for the Arab states, but also our colleagues from the Teacher Task Force that have been behind the scenes organizing and looking after this event. So with that, I would just like to thank you all, and to tell you that we will be taking stock of all of the conversations that were had today, and that we will be producing a report that we will be able to share with you all in the near future, and that will probably be part of the conversations, and we hope of the final drafting of the Futures of Education publication in November. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, have a good evening, or morning, whatever you might be. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye to everyone.
Bye, thank you.